If you own the Canon R100, R50, or R10, and you're currently still using the kit lens that came with the camera, then you're not getting the full potential out of your camera, and I'd highly recommend this as your first lens upgrade. This is the Canon 50mm f1.8, and I know there are already a lot of reviews on this awesome lens, but in this video I really want to specifically talk about why it's a better upgrade than the kit lens and why I think it's a clear answer for anyone looking for an upgrade. Now, Canon has a lot of great lenses that are high quality but also come with a very high price. And then Canon has some cheaper lenses, but they come with a cheaper quality to them. So the nice thing about this 50mm is that it comes with great quality at a very affordable price. Those two things combined make this a great option for beginners, and in this review we're going to talk about why it's awesome quality, kind of go over all the features, pros, and some cons, maybe some reasons why you might not want this lens. But without further ado, let's jump into the review. Now, to understand why this lens is such an upgrade from the kit lens, you first have to understand what aperture is. So for example, on your kit lens, mine is the 18-45, you might have the same lens. The maximum aperture is f4.5, or since this is a variable aperture, if you zoom into 45mm, the maximum aperture is going to be f6.3. Now, if you don't understand a lot about photography, I'm definitely not shaming you because at some point I had to learn this too. But aperture is a really big deal because on a lens like this, the maximum aperture being f4.5 is really not that great. I noticed that right away. This was the only RF mount lens when I got this camera, and it just didn't handle very well in a low light scenario, and it didn't give me that nice professional blurry background. And those are exactly the two things that a better aperture is going to do, a faster aperture. So on this lens, you got f1.8. So basically, the lower the number, the wider that lens is going to open and allow more light into the sensor. And that's going to do two things. First of all, it's going to give you better low light performance. And secondly, it's going to give you the ability to get a blurrier background. So if you're, say, doing portrait photography or product photography, you're able to get your subject very clear and in focus, and the background is going to be much more blurry. In order to get that professional look, you have to have a fast aperture. So this one having an f1.8 aperture versus the 4.5 or 6.3 when it's zoomed in is a huge upgrade. Now that is the first one, and obviously that is a very big one. That's probably the biggest reason you'd want to upgrade to a nice prime lens. So number two, it is able to get really good quality photos and videos. It's a very sharp lens, and it's just everything that you'd expect from a modern lens, just very good quality. Third, as I mentioned, the price is really good. This lens, if you would buy it today at its full MSRP price, would cost you $200. And in the world where lenses can cost you $2,000, that's an excellent price. And since this lens has been out for a while, you're able to find it either on sale, refurbished, or used for a lot less. You can find some for around $150 or maybe even $100 if it's used. But for, $100 to $200, that's a great price for a very good prime lens. Now, another big pro is it has such a small form factor. So if you're out traveling, this lens isn't going to take up a lot of room in your camera bag. It's also not very heavy, so it's very compact and light for travel. Another one is that it has a focus control ring. And you have a switch on the side so you can switch between focus, and then also if you switch it to control, you can have it adjust a setting like, say, your ISO. You can just turn that as an extra dial for dialing in your settings if you're using manual settings, which I do, and it's very useful to have that. So yeah, having that focus ring or control ring is also a nice feature on this lens. Now, this lens does come with some cons, so we're going to dive into those now. As I mentioned, this is a 50mm, but that's on a full frame camera, and if you're using the Canon R100, R50, or R10, those all have an APS-C sensor. So it's a smaller sensor and it's going to crop in on the image. So on something like the 50mm, rather than being a true 50mm, it's going to actually be zoomed in and closer to, with a crop factor, it's going to be closer to like 80mm. So whenever you're out taking videos and photos, it's actually going to be an 80mm equivalent, and that in some scenarios is zoomed in a little too much. I've found that sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable as far as the focal distance. The kit lens, you can zoom in and out. This is a prime lens, so you're stuck at that 80mm equivalent focal distance. So that's not a con for everyone. 80mm is actually a very comfortable range for portraits, product photography. If you're going to be doing any kind of B-roll with a tripod or anything like that, you're able to get a really nice shallow depth of field. So it's not necessarily a con, but in some scenarios, 80 millimeters is going to be too zoomed in if you're indoors or anywhere area where it's going to be more tight. Sometimes that focal distance isn't quite that great. I will say I found that, in comparison to the zoom lens, like the kit lens, you're able to just zoom in and out. That kind of makes you a little bit lazy. So having a prime lens like this 50 millimeter is actually really great for beginners because it forces you to get up and move around and try to find, how you can frame things better than just kind of sitting there and zooming in and out. Now, another thing, this lens doesn't have image stabilization. So if you're going to be doing any video work, sometimes this can be a little bit shaky. If you have your digital image stabilization enabled and you use some image stabilization in post, you're able to get kind of a nice smooth shot, but just on its own, without having image stabilization at 80 millimeters is not ideal for a lot of people. And I've definitely seen that on, some amateurs video work with a 50 millimeter, it's gonna be shaky. So if you're gonna be using something like a tripod or a gimbal, obviously then you'll get that smooth footage. But if you're using handheld, it can be a little bit shaky at times. All right, the last con I have on this list is that it's kind of a cheap plastic, which does make it lightweight, but you kind of get what you pay for, and I feel like the quality of the lens doesn't feel like a premium lens. It's definitely not an L lens, but yeah, the plastic's a little bit cheap, so I wish they would have made it maybe a little bit better quality, but not to say that this is gonna fall apart, but just keep that in mind. So to wrap up this review, with all the pros and cons weighing them, I feel like there's definitely a lot more pros than cons, and I feel like having that better aperture is the biggest one. If you're planning on doing any kind of photography, like portrait photography, animals or children, any kind of product photography, or any scenario where you want the subject to remain in focus and the background to be a little bit more blurry and separated, this is an awesome lens. I feel like with this lens, the 50 millimeter lens, I could put this on something like the Canon R10 and feel very confident to go shoot professional work. Like I could take this and go help as a second shooter on a wedding or something like that because this lens is going to get amazing results. I don't feel like I'd be as confident with something like the kit lens. So it might not be the lens that you're going to use all the time, but I feel like it's definitely a good one to have in the kit. It's not going to cost a lot of money, and I feel like the image quality and the results that you're able to get with this nice budget lens is extremely nice. So I'd highly recommend it to any beginner out there, especially if you haven't purchased any other lenses. I feel like this is a very nice first lens. So hopefully I described everything really well and it made sense to you. I try to be as clear as possible for beginners, but if I wasn't, leave a comment in the comment section below. If you have any comments or questions, I'll definitely get back to you. If you do want to pick up this lens, there is a link in the description, so definitely check that out. And if this review was helpful, drop a like. If you want to see other budget gear reviews, consider subscribing, and if you do, I'll catch you in the next video.